Today I will be reading Exodus chapter 18, verse 13 to 27, which is page 76 in the Church Bibles. The next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood round him from morning till evening. When the father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge, while all these people stand round you from morning till evening?" Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and laws." Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God, and bring their disputes to him. Teach them the decrees and laws, and show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform. But select capable men from all of the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. That will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all the people will go home satisfied." Moses listened to his family-in-law and did everything he said. He chose them as leaders of all the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the people at all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided themselves. Then Moses sent his father-in-law out of his way, and Jethro returned to his own country.
Today's passage is about appointing judges and the law. So, I've had this book in my study for the last 10 years, The World's Stupidest Laws. What a better time to bring it out. Thought I'd just regale you with some bits here. I'm going to give you a few courtroom queries, as they're said. So the question comes, as an officer of the Metropolitan Police, did you stop a car bearing the licence plate K230EJK? Answer, yes. Question, was the car occupied at the time? Took a second, didn't it? Next one. Where were you on the bike at the time? Answer, on the seat. And thirdly, when was the last time you saw Mr. Martin? Answer, at his funeral. Question, did he make any comment to you at that time? And finally, some what's entitled Stupid Laws of Europe. Let's go to England. Did you know that beds must not be hung out of windows? Doesn't matter how hot it is. Did you also know it's against the law to eat mince pies on the 25th of December? I'll be watching you in 6 months' time. And this one, all Englishmen over 14 years old are meant to carry out about 2 hours of a longbow practice a week under the supervision of the local clergy. It's a shame that Diana and Monica aren't here to hear that one, but will remind us. Sometimes Bible passages can be quite difficult to understand, talking of higher things, but today's passage is refreshingly practical, dealing with matters of judicial procedure, but no less important. And the first thing that is interesting about this passage is it's amazing how early in the Jewish story that the issue of justice arises. We're following our exposition of Exodus. I'm following on from Richard Renou's talk 2 weeks ago. And this is happening just after the Exodus itself and the celebration of that event. And straight away, we are talking about justice. Clearly, this is a priority for Moses and God. You didn't hear anything about justice when they were slaves in Egypt. But in this way, justice derives from the very character of God. So, Moses isn't just dispensing practical advice here. He is giving out the very words, the teaching, the Torah of God. And in that way, Moses is a type of Christ because he is pointing forward to an even greater mediator in Jesus Christ. But the premise of the passage, as Diana's really well expanded already, is that Moses is overworked. He's a bit hot and bothered. I bet some of you can identify with that right now. But being worked to the bone, running on fumes, running on empty, being snowed under, it may have been different nature of work that Moses was doing, but we can all empathise with that feeling, I'm sure. And we don't really know whether Moses was just a bit of a control freak or a bit unreflective and hadn't thought of this idea, but it takes his father-in-law to come, give him some advice, and for Moses to put that into action to alleviate the passage. So what can we learn from it? And you'll be absolutely delighted. We're going to be traditional today. I've got 4 points for you. The first one is, you're never too important to listen to advice, important or old. So Jethro was well-meaning. He wasn't out to disrupt Moses' role. He wanted to uphold it. But he also wanted him to find a way for him to faithfully find a workable solution to sharing the burden. Now, if you listened to Richard Renou's talk a couple of weeks ago, he talked about the background of who Jethro was. I thought it was very fascinating. If you didn't hear it, catch up on that. Jethro is Moses' father-in-law. He was a polytheistic priest in the land of Midian who would go on to be one of Israelites' enemies. Moses had stayed with Jethro for 40 years of his life when he ran away from Egypt. So he'd been under his influence. This is not the recipe you would choose for the training of one of the greatest leaders of the Jewish faith. But actually, if we step back a couple of verses from our passage, verse 11, Jethro announces this, "Now I know the Lord is greater than all gods." And what's amazing there is the influence has gone 2 ways. Not only was Moses influenced by Jethro, Jethro has been influenced by Moses to the point where he's no longer polytheistic, but he's become monotheistic. Help can come from the most unlikely of places, eh? But it wasn't a given that while having been given advice, Moses would be to take it on board. Is it okay, the microphone? Just wave at me if we need to swap. Okay. If anyone's watched Dragon's Den, which I don't do very frequently, have you ever seen it when a candidate comes into the den and the dragons very quickly turn on them and say, "No, your business plan's rubbish. No, I'm not investing in this. No, you need to cut your losses, do something else. It's not worth it. Don't invest any more of your time." And certainly in the episodes I've watched, when that happens, the candidate quite often responds with, "No, I'm going to double down. It's my idea. I think this is going to work. I'm going to prove you wrong." And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. The point is, it's hard for a leopard to change its spots, right? I'll give you another example. Most of you will know that I do a fair bit of running. In a couple of months' time, I'm going to be reaching a personal milestone. I'm going to have to decide whether to keep running or not. Watch and wait on that front. The point is, change can be hard. Character change can be even harder. And the biggest character change of all for us becoming more like Jesus can only be accomplished through the help of the transformational power of the Holy Spirit. But today's passage is a good news story, because Moses was able to listen and act on the advice. Despite being the leader that everyone looked up to, he was humble enough. How do we know he's humble? If you were to turn to the book of Numbers, chapter 12 and verse 3, it says, "Now the man Moses was very meek," or humble, "more than all people who were on the face of the earth." You're never too important to listen to advice. Note that Moses was probably about 80 years old in this passage as well. The point is, positive change, in this case, good delegation, was only possible with the right attitude. And it's really easy as you get a bit older to get stuck in ruts, become a bit more grumpy, but we're called to become more humble as we walk with and towards Jesus. And that links directly to the next point. Your character is more important than your skills. Just some advice here. Not only does he talk about the recruit. Is that better? Oh. I'll tell you what. For those watching the football, we're going to have a hydration break. And I'll just take a drink as well. Here we go. Okay. Colin, can you hear me? Excellent. Right. Another hydration break. Jesso's advice started with the recruitment of good people. They were to be able, God-fearing haters of dishonest gain. For these people, it was unlikely to be headline-hitting embezzlement that would get them. It would be more modest bribes on the side. Those wanting to oil the wheels of justice. But throughout the Bible, there is a strong emphasis on character. God looks to those whose hearts are tuned to him, not necessarily their outward skills. Think of Gideon, from the smallest tribe, the weakest clan. Think of David, who's described as a man after my own heart, after God's own heart. Even Rahab the prostitute, Ruth the Moabite, both were blessed by becoming part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. The Bible talks also about people who go through prolonged character training. Moses, we mentioned, 40 years. Joseph languished in an Egyptian prison. Maybe Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Even Gideon having his army whittled down to 300 men, and none could carry a sword. What's the point? The connection is that their character was right. They put God first, and God did the rest, and he got the glory as a result. Getting the right people, the right character, is not something that just is recognised in the Christian world. It's also, if you pick up most modern leadership books, you'll find a similar thing. Jim Collins wrote a very famous one called Good to Great. Some of you may be familiar with it. And if I turn to one of his very early chapters, it's entitled First Who, Then What? And he starts by saying, the executives who ignited the transformations from good to great did not first figure out where to drive the bus and then get people to take it there. No, they first got the right people on the bus and the wrong people off it, and then figured out where to drive it. They said, in essence, look, I don't really know where we should take the bus, but I know this much. If we get the right people on the bus and the right people off it and the right people in the right seats, then we'll figure out where to take it. Your character is more important. Putting God first is more important than how much free time you've got, how much training you've had. If God is first, the rest can be worked out. A broken spirit and a contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. And it doesn't matter what you've done up to now in your life, doesn't matter if you've had a stinker, been dealt a bad hand, however you say it. If you don't feel you've been useful to God so far, there's never been a time to start. God is the God of the second chance. He wants to change and transform by the blood of Christ so that you can be useful to him. On the 10th of March, 1748, the antagonistic, atheist, slave-trading rebel John Newton cried out to God as his ship was sinking off the coast of Donegal. God rescued him and he began a new life, going on, amongst other things, to write one of the most famous hymns we know of, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Third point, get ready. Once having picked the right people, verse 20, it says, you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws, make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Jethro's advice wasn't just picking the right people, but it was giving them practical training. Quite often people talk about nature versus nurture, whether it's intelligence, leadership, elite sportsmanship, how much are you born with, how much can you learn? It's always a debate. Thomas Edison famously said that genius was 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Those appointed in our passage today to be judges were chosen for their character, nature, but they were also needed to be trained by Moses, nurture. And training can be physical in order to serve a spiritual purpose. Last week, a few of us were gathered in the hall and Liz kindly did safeguarding training. You can go to ministerial or theological college and learn. If you're a musician, you can do music practice towards worship leading. Physical training can stretch and build up the muscles of faith for the work God has called you for. And this topic you can even apply to being a Christian. We are saved by God. We are born again. That is the nature of being born again. But we are called to live our lives for Jesus, to become more like Jesus. That's nurture. In fact, I came up with this actually, which you can agree or disagree with. But nature without nurture may lead to arrogance. You might say, I don't need to learn. Nurture without nature may lead to incompetence, lacking instincts. But nature with nurture provides a powerful platform and an effective combination for change. So the question is, how are you nurturing your faith and your skills? How are you getting ready for the things that God has called you to? And there's a final point. Faithfulness requires structure. You know, God likes order. He created the world in a very orderly way, out of nothing. And here we see in our passage today the orderly outworking of a judicial system. The setup involved a number of smaller courts that those selected would judge in. Think of them as more magistrate-type courts, but any difficult decision will get referred up to Moses, who would preside in a more crown-type court. The Israelites were called to respect the system, and whilst we may look back at all of this Old Testament law and think, my word, that was a bit archaic, haven't we come on a bit since then? At the time, it was extremely radical. Not only radical for its content, but it was radical because this justice system was available to all. It wasn't just available to those who had the means to access for their own means. But regardless of your wealth, your status, this system, anyone could go to it and get justice. Hugely progressive at that time. And the byproduct of this, the work became more sustainable for Moses. A win-win, you might say. And I actually think this passage really affirms anyone who works in an administrative role, a managerial role, that your work is just as important for the kingdom as anyone who teaches, preaches, leads worship, anything else you can think of. So, to conclude, perhaps the greatest surprise of this whole chapter is that God not only reveals himself in the miracles and the mountaintops, but also in the meeting agendas, the delegated responsibilities, the training and the fair processes. But this chapter is more than just a sensible management structure. It shows us a bit about what it's like to live under God's rule. And everyone played their part. Moses needed the humility to listen and to act. The judges needed the character. The people needed the training to walk in God's ways, and the whole nation needed the discipline to respect the order that God had established. What's the point there? The point is justice did not happen by accident. It required humble people, godly people, prepared people, and people willing to play their part. And this links into what Diana said at the end of the Clive talk, because we can apply that to our church today. As a church community, we're not designed for one person to carry everyone's burdens. Families are not strengthened by one person carrying responsibility. Communities don't flourish because a few people work themselves into exhaustion while everyone else watches on by. God's pattern is different. He calls each one of us to serve faithfully where he has placed us. So perhaps today God's calling you to listen to the advice you've been resisting. Perhaps he's calling you to take greater attention to your character than your abilities. Perhaps he's calling you to prepare for a role that he has for you. But ultimately, this passage points us beyond Moses to Jesus. Because unlike Moses, Jesus doesn't weary. He doesn't get tired. He is able, in his role as judge and mediator, to perfectly combine wisdom, justice, mercy, and truth. And unlike the judges in Exodus, Jesus doesn't simply help to carry the burden. He resolved the greatest burden, which was sin. At the cross, justice and mercy meet together. Christ bore our judgment, and we are free to serve him, responding to his grace. So where's God asking you to respond today? To listen, grow in character, to get ready, or to step forward and help carry a burden? Let me just put up a prayer, which I'll pray now. That God would make you, make me, make us a people who are humble enough to listen, godly enough to be trusted, diligent enough to prepare, and faithful enough to serve. And may it be all for the glory of Christ. Amen.